I live in a charming suburban neighborhood, where each resident seems to have a unique story to tell. Among them is our neighbor, who we fondly refer to as Piketty. Piketty, with her impeccable landscaping and penchant for critique, possesses a flair for inspecting everyone's outdoor pursuits from the comfort of her front porch. Her penchant for offering unsolicited advice has become somewhat of a local legend. One sunny weekend, the warm breeze beckoned my partner, our adorable toddler, and me to spend some quality time in our front yard garden. Donning a casual tank top and a trusty sports bra, I was blissfully unaware of the impending chaos. A mischievous fly had decided to take residence within my top, causing unexpected distress. Startled by my sudden squirming and flailing, my partner hurried over, shielding our little one while trying to comprehend the situation. In a moment of panic, I blurted out, "There's a fly in my bra. It's buzzing around my chest." My partner, thinking I was dealing with a bee sting, reacted with relieved laughter, much to my dismay. Meanwhile, our watchful neighbor, Piketty, who had been observing our gardening escapades with her eagle-eyed scrutiny, was completely taken aback. I could almost hear the gasp and see the shock ripple across her face as she clutched her pearls in disbelief. Determined not to cause a public scene or be the subject of neighborhood gossip, I discreetly attempted to extricate the unwelcome visitor from my clothing. The fly, eager to evade my efforts, swiftly made its escape, leaving me grateful for the relief and slightly flustered by the whole spectacle. A few days later, as I stepped outside to collect the mail, Piketty was, as always, lingering in her meticulously manicured garden. Remembering the unexpected shock I'd unintentionally caused her, I made a subtle adjustment to my attire. Much to my amusement, Piketty promptly disappeared indoors, seemingly reluctant to witness any more unexpected revelations from our side of the fence. The incident became a lighthearted anecdote shared amongst friends, and while Piketty's vigilant gaze continued, it seemed my accidental reveal had granted me a novel way to deter her inquisitive tendencies. Lesson learned: sometimes, the most trivial occurrences lead to the most memorable neighborhood tales. I grew up in an Asian family where my paternal grandparents resided with us for many years. Unfortunately, my grandmother's behavior toward my mother was consistently critical and disrespectful. Eventually, due to various reasons including this, my parents divorced when I was 19. Being an introvert, I maintained a low level of contact, LC, with my father and grandparents. Despite my mother's divorce, she eventually found someone who treated her well and remarried. On the other hand, my father remarried someone in China, although the timing of this marriage remained unknown to me. One day, my younger brother approached me about our father's wish to organize a fishing trip. Excited by the idea of reliving the family tradition of fishing, I agreed. However, to my surprise, upon arriving, a fourth person joined us, my stepsister, who I had never met. My brother had already been acquainted with her, and although I found it unexpected, I brushed it off, primarily focused on enjoying the fishing outing. In 2019, while attending my cousin's wedding in California, I received the distressing news of my father's passing due to a stroke. Despite my initial breakdown upon hearing the news, I managed to contain my emotions, not wanting to disrupt the wedding celebrations. Both my mother and brother encouraged me to remain at the wedding and return home after the event. It was a challenging time, holding back my grief and keeping the sad news private. Once back home, the funeral took place about 5 days later, where relatives, including my grandmother, attended. During the wake, I went to greet my uncles and aunts alongside my grandmother, but she deliberately ignored me and proclaimed that my younger brother was the eldest child of the family, effectively disregarding my existence. In a conversation with my stepsister, my grandmother made hurtful remarks, implying that my stepsister and her mother were the only sources of happiness for my late father. My grandmother even accused my mother of contributing to my father's health issues and subsequent demise, an accusation that deeply angered me, although I chose to remain silent. On the day of the funeral, traditional beliefs prevented my grandmother from attending her child's funeral, citing it as inauspicious. Flowers were to be placed on the casket, and my family had bought a set for this purpose. However, our flowers were removed by my grandmother, instructing the funeral director to replace them with the flowers sent by my stepsister and her mother. These actions felt like a direct attack on our family's grief. Consequently, my mother, stepfather, brother, sister-in-law, and I opted not to join the rest of the mourners for lunch after the funeral. Additionally, although we had discussed sharing the funeral expenses among us, my mother insisted on covering the entire cost, despite being divorced from my father for about 15 years. In the end, we didn't contribute financially. Jumping ahead to earlier this year, during my youngest cousin's wedding, seating arrangements had my mother and her partner at a table with my uncles, aunts, and grandmother, while I was seated with other cousins and their partners. I went over to chat with my relatives, and when invited to sit down, I took a seat between my aunt and grandmother, facing my aunt. Throughout the evening, I refrained from acknowledging my grandmother's presence. Later, I discovered that she tried to capture my attention but was dismayed by my deliberate indifference. If she chooses to ignore me, I will reciprocate in kind, allowing her actions to mirror my own. This sequence of events has highlighted the deep-seated issues within our family, and I've chosen to distance myself from toxic behavior by not engaging with it.
Allow me to commence by asserting that my former landlady is a remarkable as I'm certain many will concur when I expound upon the entire saga. So, here it goes. In 2022, my family and I dwelled in a mobile home we had rented for nearly 9 years by that time. Our rapport with the prior landlord was harmonious. He was the property owner, a decent guy who promptly fixed things when they were amiss. If he couldn't mend something, we would deduct the repair costs from the rent. Remarkably, he didn't require us to sign a lease beyond the initial one in 2013. We had a verbal agreement to maintain the rent and repair arrangements. Then, in 2020, I learned he had passed away from COVID-related complications. His childless ex-wife inherited the property. Initially, she was reluctant, expressing she didn't wish to manage the property but decided to try due to our long-term tenancy. My husband and I highlighted various issues with the house, minor yet potentially escalating problems if unaddressed, like faulty wiring and the need for cooling unit replacements in this antiquated house. She pledged to contact us shortly to assess the concerns and initiate the required work. Unbeknownst to us, the landlady was covertly attempting to sell the property without informing us. Conversations with her became terse, hinting at property inspections. However, she'd attempt to enter without proper notice, a breach of state laws requiring a minimum 48 hours written notice for tenant entry. Then, our water supply was inexplicably cut off. I discovered it was due to a leak in the main water line, located about 2/3 mile from our home. The water company shut it off to prevent further wastage. I informed the landlady, who promised repairs. Yet, weeks passed with excuses and no fix. Financially strained, we started hunting for new accommodation but struggled. The breaking point arrived when my child handed me an eviction notice posted on our door. The landlady claimed she tried to inspect but was impeded by us, leading to the property's sale and our eviction. She gave us 3 weeks, right before Christmas, to vacate. My husband swiftly secured a new home, and we relocated before the deadline. As petty revenge, I changed all exterior locks, withholding updated keys, and took parts from the circuit box we recently fixed without reimbursement. I also left a note for the new owners about the unresolved water leak. To date, the property remains unoccupied, and without a paper lease, her hands are tied, all because she was reluctant to bother with signing one. Back when I worked in McDonald's as a lobby staff member, we would get rude college kids come into the store, aged around 18 years old. One group were constantly told off for vaping in the store every time they came in. There were also a lot of young children in the store, so I didn't appreciate them vaping THC in a public place. They would vape secretly, in the toilets and at their table. Since we would tell them off for doing it, they would deliberately make mess in order to punish the staff for it. I'm talking piss and water on the toilet floor, whole rolls of toilet paper blocking the toilets, wet floor signs covering shitty nappies that they had taken from the disabled/baby changing toilet into the boys' toilet, wet floor signs upside down in the toilets that were filled with piss/shit and unflushed, deliberately making a mess with sugar, salt, and sauces smeared on the table, sticking tomatoes to windows and pointing at it and laughing at us, flipping the bird, making fun of my overweight colleagues, etc. You get the idea. One time, I was cleaning up their messy table as usual after they had left when I came across a big, heavy, and expensive-looking vape. Ordinarily, I would keep such items in the cupboard in case that person came back. But this one I threw straight in the bin. About an hour later, a panic-stricken boy came in to inquire about his missing vape, whom I recognized as the ringleader of the group. He asked if I had seen it and said that he last had it in the restaurant. I said I hadn't seen it and that because of the mess on the table, I had dragged the bin over and swept everything from the table into it to save time. He was visibly crushed and said that it cost his parents £50 to buy it for him. That he was in trouble for losing it and could I check the bin bags out back for it? I said sure and stood out the back for a few minutes before coming back to say I couldn't find it. Then I made a remark about how he would have seen his vape on the table had it not been covered by burger wrappers. Guess who put all of their rubbish in the bin the next time they came in?
It was a brisk morning, with the sun barely peeking over the horizon as I prepared for my day. My plans included a quick stop at CVS before diving into the day's work. The clock read 8:30 a.m., and the streets were bustling with the usual morning rush hour. The symphony of cars commuting to various destinations created a backdrop to the start of another busy day. As I pulled out of my driveway, I meticulously gauged the distance between cars, aiming to merge into the traffic without causing any inconvenience. Finding a safe opening, I smoothly accelerated up to the 35 miles per hour speed limit. However, the car behind me, impatient and seemingly in a frantic rush, recklessly accelerated to over 50 miles per hour, closing the gap between us rapidly. Tailgating me with mere inches to spare, the driver's impatience became palpable. Her aggressive driving made me feel uneasy and pressured, undermining the safety of the situation. We approached an upcoming intersection, and as fate would have it, she intended to turn left, while my route veered right. An idea sparked in my mind, an impulsive desire to teach a lesson in road etiquette. As the traffic signal glowed yellow, indicating an impending red light, I chose to decelerate. My car's pace dropped by an additional 5 miles per hour, deliberately forcing the tailgater to make a split-second decision, run a red light or halt abruptly. I made my turn gracefully as the signal transitioned to red, while she hesitated, missing the opportunity to glide through the intersection. The consequence of her impatient tailgating? A minor delay, perhaps a mere 2 minutes of her time. Reflecting on this incident, it was a minuscule act of reprisal, yet a moment where a subtle sense of satisfaction whispered in my mind, knowing that I had managed to momentarily disrupt her speedy trajectory. This was my tale of a minor yet satisfying dose of retribution, served on the plate of a morning commute. This was way back when I was in college. One of my best friends at the time, Holly, had come to the same college as me from high school. We lived in different dorms, but Holly had a roommate and I didn't, so she spent a lot of time at my dorm. Even before we had started our freshman year, Holly had started taking massive advantage of my being an accommodating friend. She had a massive crush on this absolute clown that she worked with who was a good bit older than us and also just an idiot. Since Holly didn't have her own car, she often bummed rides from me to go up to the place she worked on her off days so she could follow this dude around like a lovesick puppy dog while I just hung around and waited for her. In retrospect, as an adult, I should have told her to take a hike, but I was 18. So, Holly and I went to freshman orientation at our college together and shared a room. The first night, I ended up puking my guts up all night while Holly sat on her bed talking to this guy the entire night. On my cell phone. My parents, who paid my phone bill, weren't super happy about it because this was in the early 2000s when everyone had minutes on their phone and Holly was running mine up. But I told them it was fine and she wouldn't do it again. Once we started our freshman year of college, she got worse. She still didn't have a cell phone of her own. This was around 2002/2003, and I did, so she was always asking to use my phone and my computer. She also didn't have one of those to talk this dude. I'll give him a name and call him Josh. Using my computer was one thing. That didn't cost any money, although it was extremely annoying since the only time she seemed to be interested in hanging out was when she wanted to talk to him. It got worse when she started wanting to get into my room when I was in class so she could talk to this guy. Eventually, though, she asked to borrow my phone again and, stupidly, I let her. Phone bill ran up again. I got chewed out by my parents and was told, quite reasonably, I might add, that Holly was no longer allowed to use my phone at all. Period. So, I relay this to Holly and tell her it's extra crazy that she's taking advantage of me as a friend and is only interested in using my stuff. She gets pissed, gets off, and that's the end of that. But, friends, it wasn't the end of that, because by this time, I was finally pissed. Not only did this girl use my stuff and then drop me like a bad habit when the favors dried up, but she also had the gall to be a total, ungrateful friend about it. It just so happened that the same time all of this was going on and Holly was chasing Josh and whispering sweet nothings into his ear, which he had finally become receptive to after months and months of her hounding him, she was also around with one of the guys who lived in my building. I knew this was happening and I also knew that she was emailing both of them these same sweet nothings along with some raunchy somethings, and it just so happened that we had been the type of friends who sometimes shared passwords. So, I had the password to her email. I pulled every raunchy email she had sent to the guy in my building, created a sock puppet email and emailed all of it to Josh, playing the part of concerned coworker who didn't want to get involved, but just couldn't watch such a stand-up guy get played like that. Her story imploded and I never looked back.